I'm going to go ahead and introduce our author for the evening. Nina LaCour is the award-winning and best-selling author of 6 novels for young adults, including We Are Okay, a Prince Award winner and national bestseller. She lives in San Francisco with her wife and daughter and dog. Yerba Buena is her first novel for adults and the reason we are here tonight, so please join me in welcoming Nina LaCour.
Thank you all so much for coming, and Green Apple, thank you so much for hosting me. And thank you for those of you who are online. I know that I heard from plenty of people that you are joining me from online, so hello. I am so happy to read to you tonight, and I'm going to read 2 passages from Yerba Buena. I will begin by just letting you know that Yerba Buena is what one early reader described a love story nestled within. My daughter's in the front row and she's giving me silent applause, so I feel very supported right now. It's a love story nestled within 2 kind of coming into adulthood narratives, following 2 young women, Emily and Sarah, from their teen years until around the time they are 30. So I'm going to begin with the very first pages of the book, and then I'm going to jump forward 10 years. So this begins with the character of Sarah. An afternoon in spring. They rode together up the hill, blur of trees and sky outside, groan of brakes, a current between them. With each curve of the road, the press of one bare shoulder against another, until the bus slowed and stopped. The doors folded open, they stepped out to the street. Armstrong Drive dead-ended there, a parking lot, a ranger station, the entrance to the woods. Sarah unzipped her backpack and pulled out a thermos, unscrewed the lid and sipped. Their fingers touched as Annie took it, and Sarah watched Annie press her mouth against its metal rim and drink. It struck Sarah every time, the way the air changed as she entered the forest. Cool, wet, fresh dirt, even bright days like this one, dimming and softening. Should we get a map? Annie asked, but Sarah shook her head. She knew the woods well, had no trouble getting lost or finding her way back. She took Annie's hand and led her past the station. A group of tourists brushed by them, their faces upturned. It felt good to feel small. That's why her mother had taken her here when she was a little girl, why Sarah kept coming after her mother died. They cut onto Sarah's favorite trail, the steepest, the quietest, and hiked until they were breathless, eye level with the ancient redwoods branches, as close as they could be to the sky. Over there, Annie asked. Sarah followed her gaze to a grove off the trail. She nodded, her heart quickened. They stepped as carefully as they could across the forest floor to a ring of young redwoods with a hollow trunk at its center. There, they unzipped their backpacks, pulled out a blanket and a couple of sweaters, and laid them over the pine needles. The forest was quiet. Everyone else was far away. Can I kiss you now? Sarah asked. Not yet, Annie said. She pulled her t-shirt up over her head. Now? Annie shook her head. Your turn. So Sarah took off her shirt too, and Annie rushed to kiss her before Sarah could ask again. The relief of it, after the hours of waiting. The thrill of it. 2 14-year-olds secretly in love. Sarah sank to the blanket, Annie atop her. They kissed the curves of necks and collarbones, smiled, blushed, kissed deeper. After a time, they rested together, Annie's head in the crook of Sarah's neck. Look, Annie whispered, and Sarah saw a banana slug, bright yellow, emerging from a fern. It made its way to Sarah, and she flinched at the strange cold slickness of it, tried not to laugh. The slug made its way across her pale stomach and then to Annie's. It took an eternity. They were 3 creatures in the forest. The girls held very still. The slug left a glittering trail of slime on her skin. In its wake, a wave of grief. The tiny diamonds of a hospital gown, the flamingo pink polish Sarah had applied to her mother's nails in careful strokes, yellowed eyes, cracked white lips, the nurse's concerned expressions, and Sarah's little brother's tantrums and how their father had stood in corners when he visited, his hands clasped behind his back. Throughout the weeks in the hospital, the sensation that Sarah was hovering over an abyss, and then her mother was gone, and she plunged into it. Hey, Annie murmured, and Sarah was back in the redwood grove, her heart pounding. What are you thinking about? Nothing, really. A breeze stirred the branches above them. Tell me something I don't know yet, Annie said, about you. Her voice was close to Sarah's ear, her body soft, pressed against Sarah's skin. What could Sarah say that would please her? Not anything from the last 2 years, not the months before either. Nothing from school, because though it felt sometimes like they'd just met, they'd sat in classrooms together since they were small. She'd need to go further back, and then she found it. My family used to play a game together, a drawing game. We'd sit around the table and one of us would start, usually my dad. He'd draw a street or a train or a mountain, and then the next person would add something to it, people or cars or the sky. Whoever was last would complete it. And by then the whole page would be full. I loved it so much, waiting to see what they'd draw, thinking something to surprise them. We'd do it for hours at times. She hoped it was enough, felt Annie pull her closer. The sun was low in the sky by then, and they were due back. Annie to her twin and their parents, Sarah to her little brother to make sure he was fed. He was probably mounting his bicycle, leaving his friend's place now, heading home. Maybe their father would be there tonight, maybe not. Either way, Sarah would need to catch the bus back to town before the sun set over the ramshackle cabins and the rustic vacation homes and the wide, muddy river, over the Appaloosa bar and Wishes and Secrets hair salon and Lily's father's white steepled church. But just another few minutes here first, she thought. Another kiss, another bird high above, another breeze cooling her skin. How easy it was to forget the rest when they were small and safe in the woods. Right, and now I'm going to skip forward 10 years to a different character. And so that was Sarah, and this is Emily, and the story alternates between the two. And this scene picks up right after Emily has had a kind of disastrous brunch with her family, in which she has told them that she is going to change her major again for like the 6th or 7th time. She's been in college for many, many years by this point, and her parents really don't like this idea, and she feels really bad about it. So let's see. I'm deciding how much to read. Okay, I'm just gonna go for it. So she's leaving brunch. Brunch was over and she was driving again. And this is in Los Angeles now, before it was in Northern California. Brunch was over and she was driving again, a few blocks from her studio apartment, when she saw the woman hanging the help wanted sign in the window of the flower shop. Fate, she thought, pulling over. The school conversation clung to her as much as she tried to shake it, to tell herself it didn't matter, that they were only concerned. Most people go to college for a degree, she told herself. She went for an education. And so who cared if it was taking her a long time? She would put all of it out of her mind. Here was the mid-afternoon summer sunshine, the heat of the sidewalk, the flower shop up close. Enough to numb the sting for a little while. It was the opposite of Pablo's family's office. Everything was unabashedly beautiful. The bright and deep greens of the sidewalk plants against the blue-black chalk facade, glint of metal planters, warmth of clay pots. Inside, the smell of clean dirt and candles. The woman who had moments ago hung the sign was now behind the counter. Hi, Emily said, and extended her hand. She had her interview right then and there. She had never before worked for a florist, but she'd taken a weekend class in floral design, had made many wreaths, had even done the flowers for the low-key wedding of a college friend. And of course, there were the lessons Mrs. Santos had given her over the years, the reverence she'd imparted. Meredith, the shop owner, asked her to assemble a few sample arrangements, and Emily got to work. She wanted this job. She felt its brightness. She thought the beauty of it might coax out some dormant part of her and jolt it awake. The florist I'm replacing had our restaurant accounts, Meredith said. Olive, the Granite Club, Yerba Buena, Silverado. I love Yerba Buena, Emily said. I had my first legal cocktail there when I turned 21. Sophisticated choice for a 21-year-old. It's my parents' favorite restaurant. They leave it any excuse to go. Actually, I've noticed the floral arrangements there. A lot of branches and leaves, right? Big blossoms, proteas, and philodendrons, nothing too traditional. Yes, but I want you to bring your own vision. As long as you're good and the arrangements complement the space, the owners will be happy. My own vision, Emily thought. Her flora phase was so long ago, and yet it came back to her. The woody smell of snips and stems, thorn pricks, and sore fingers. Meredith craned her neck to see what Emily was doing. Take your time with those. Let me know when you're finished. Emily could have spent hours editing and adding, but she knew Meredith would appreciate efficiency. So after only a few minutes, she stepped back, made a few changes, and declared the arrangements complete. Meredith admired them, impressed. Can you name the flowers? She asked. And Emily looked at the wall lined with silver buckets. She named as many flowers as she could and promised she would study the rest. She wanted a job offer on the spot. She knew it would pay next to nothing, but she would make it work. Write down your information here, Meredith said, handing her a legal pad and a pencil. I'll get back to you soon. Emily faked a smile and hoped it looked genuine. Great, she said. When she got to the door, she turned back. I'd love to work for you. Your shop is beautiful. Then she shut the door behind her and felt the weight of the day. So I'm gonna skip forward a little bit. So Emily gets the job. Emily spent 2 weeks training at the florist before she was sent out in the mornings to the restaurant accounts, her car full of flowers and leaves and blossoming branches. Tuesdays, she visited a sushi place downtown, everything white and spotless. On Thursday morning, she made centerpieces for each table in a blue-tiled Greek restaurant famous for its 82-year-old chef. And 2 mornings a week, she arranged flowers for Yerba Buena. The restaurant at Sunset and Selma was a Los Angeles institution, revitalized in the past decade by Jacob Lowell, a chef who'd earned a reputation for his decade at the French Laundry, followed by a series of pop-up restaurants after his move to LA. The restaurant that formerly occupied the space had been known for its steak and its tuck, its formal service and decadent architecture, its decades-loyal regulars and throngs of tourists. It had coved ceilings, private leather booths, multiple dining rooms, and a Michelin star, though each year rumors circulated that it was on the verge of losing it. With the help of a few investors, Jacob Lowell had bought the place and closed it for 6 months. When he opened it again, many of the walls had been knocked down, fresh plaster in white and pale peach applied to those that remained. A new sign hung over the door, the letters carved into wood, Yerba Buena. Bright drawings replaced the old oil paintings. The coved ceiling stayed along with the leather booths. But now there were 2 bars and 2 large dining rooms, and the menu was unrecognizable. The old regulars complained that it was too noisy. They balked at the idea of sitting next to strangers at one of the communal tables. But the new clientele praised the lighter menu, the handmade pastas and tender meats, the delicate fish and the salads plucked from local farms, and the less fussy air of it all. The waitresses in their summer dresses, as though they were the ones going out to dinner. The sommelier who'd visit the table with an air of an old friend, eager to catch you up on what everyone's been drinking. The impossibly attractive bartenders who actually smiled when they talked to you. They were all irresistible. Emily showed up by 9 on the morning she worked there, when the restaurant was uninhabited but for her and the 2 chefs in the kitchen, the tinny echo of their music whenever the kitchen door swung open. She thought she knew the restaurant well from all the birthday and anniversary celebrations she'd spent there with her family. Their favorite booth was there in the center of the far wall. Her parents had learned its number, 48, and requested it each time they made a reservation. But she saw it in a new way now, with morning light pouring through the windows, the stillness, the quiet. She would gather the arrangement from her last visit and wrap the old flowers in newspaper. She'd wash out the vases and urns and spread the new cuttings across the community table until she saw a place to begin. A branch or a flower, a color theme, or a texture that moved her. She liked to work on several arrangements at a time. Sometimes she put on her headphones, but most of the time she enjoyed the quiet, the faraway kitchen noises, the rustling leaves, her footsteps as she circled the table, choosing the next stem. And then there were Jacob's footsteps too, at 10:30, when most of the flowers were in the urns and no longer on the table. Good morning, he'd say. Good morning, she'd say. He was generous with his compliments, so much so that she began to wonder if he had an uncommonly deep appreciation for flowers. The way he would linger, how he'd lean closer and ask questions about colors and names. All this couldn't have been about her. When he ran out of questions, he'd make his way to the kitchen or return to the dining room and sit in a far booth in what she could tell was his usual spot and eat his breakfast over a stack of paperwork. She felt his presence across the restaurant as she set the newly finished vases and urns in their rightful places, as she cleared the debris and her scissors from the community table and wiped it down. She never knew whether or not to say goodbye. He appeared so engrossed, but every time she got to the door and turned, he'd lift his hand and she'd wave back. Then one morning, after a month of these tentative questions and answers, he said his usual good morning and breezed past her to the kitchen. It was August, and the table was laden with dahlias and peonies. The blooms were thick and fragrant, enough to make her swoon, but he barely glanced at them. She placed 3 red peonies in an urn, added branches for height. She stepped back to see if it was working, and then the kitchen door swung open and he reappeared. He was carrying 2 plates toward her. Hungry? He asked. There were thick slices of bread warm from the oven, halved farm eggs with deep orange centers, berries, and jam. Yeah, she said, I'm starving. And it was true. He returned with a pot of tea and 2 ceramic cups. He chose a new breakfast table, the one right in front of the community table, scattered with her snips, ends, and supplies. That's where he now sat on the morning she worked there. Every time she finished, they'd eat together. He brought along his stacks of papers, receipts from the farms from which they sourced their meats and vegetables, copies of the schedule to approve, and Emily would pull a book from her purse and review it for the class she'd attend later that morning. They sat as though their early mornings began with a kiss, with her telling him about last night's dream from her place in the shower while he shaved at the sink, as though they discussed the arc of the day as they drove together to the restaurant, and they already knew who was going to the store and who was making dinner. By the time they parked, they were full with their talking and their knowingness of one another, and now they could sit quietly together in their separate tasks. This lasted for weeks, and it was enough for her. He and his wife were darlings of the food world, appeared in magazines, were guests at celebrities' weddings and birthdays. She was pretty sure that he had a kid, maybe more than one. She stayed later and later, closer to noon when her class started. She brought her laptop and wrote papers across from him. She found herself working better when she was with him. She could be deep in thought over a poem, her fingers flying across the keyboard, and then she'd finish her paragraph and lean back and he'd be smiling at her. His staff would trickle in. The manager, Megan, Ken, the host, to look over the reservations before returning later on. The wait staff to taste the new wines and the ever-changing menu. One morning, the bar staff came in early for a meeting and a bartender set his bike helmet down on the breakfast table. That's where Jacob and Emily sit in the mornings, Megan said. Let's move to the back. A thrill coursed through her, to be recognized this way, to be mentioned by name, even though most of the people there wouldn't even know what the woman quietly arranging flowers, that the woman quietly arranging flowers was the one they were moving for. Then a voice she didn't recognize said, we can go right to the bar, actually. I'll go over everything there. Emily turned toward her, but the stranger was already leading the others out of the main dining room. Emily walked past them all a little later on her way to throw away the first batch of the stems and discarded branches. The woman, tall and slender with short blonde hair, so attractive that Emily blushed, stood alone behind the bar while the others watched her mix and pour. Some of them took notes. When they filtered back into the dining room, the woman stopped next to Emily. I've never seen ferns used this way, she said. They're so strange with the peonies. Beautiful strange, I mean. I never would have thought of putting them together. Do you mind if I touch them? Go ahead, Emily said. These grew all over the place where I'm from. She watched the woman trace their edges, felt an overwhelming closeness, like this wasn't about ferns at all, like she was touching Emily instead. How intimate it was, the single fact about her life, the curve of her cheekbone up close, the blonde tips of her eyelashes. Tiny freckles across the bridge of her nose, like the specks of pollen Emily discovered on her clothing after work sometimes. She turned to Emily. I'm Sarah. Emily felt her blush giving her away, but managed to extend her hand. I'm Emily. Sarah's shape was firm, her hands soft, but there was something else too. Something in the way they fit together, palm against palm, that made Emily want not to let go. Okay, any questions anyone hasn't?
Okay. So your writing is extremely visual and like sensory. Listening to the first passage, just getting into it, like I can just see every little, just the whole scene, image by image. My question is, when you go and do your research, like in this case for the restaurants and cocktails, flowers, are you gathering these details, like writing them down and then fashioning them together, or when you're writing that very sensory way, are you working mostly from your imagination, or how do those things combine?
Yeah, thank you for your question. For the online audience, this was a question about whether I take notes like from the real world to use for the descriptions, or whether I more imagine them. Was that? So I wrote most of Yerba Buena actually during the pandemic, and actually during the like intense lockdown of the pandemic. And it actually, I find it kind of funny as I was reading it to you all, because it's clear that I was just like really wanting to go to a nice restaurant. So most of it was like wish fulfillment, I guess. Like I was just really craving being out in the world again. But it's a mix. I mean, I've been working on this book for a very, very long time, and a big part of the book that I didn't touch on here has to do with like home renovation and like beautiful kind of like dilapidated mansion like homes. And so I actually recently found a notebook that I had kept like, I don't know, 10 years ago or something, that is full, I think even more than 10 years ago, full of notes that was like peeling floral wallpaper, hole in the floor, yellow stain on the ceiling, like all of these details that I probably did end up using, but I'm terribly disorganized, so I do take notes and then I lose them. But I think like there is something that helps me. Like when I'm in that mode, when I am working on a project, I do tend to pay attention a lot more closely to my surroundings and think more actively about like what I can use, and then that somehow makes its way into the book. Next question.
I was going to say, that title of the book is Yerba Buena, which is, some might know, if not, they may or may not know, the original name of San Francisco. Does it reflect that emphasis on local color, slice of life for the Bay Area?
Yeah, so the title comes, of course, like there's the restaurant in Yerba Buena, but it also refers to the herb, which is like the Spanish colonizers noticed the herb growing so freely in this area and then named San Francisco after the herb. And so I was very interested. It's very much a California novel. Sarah is from the Guerneville, Russian River area, and Emily is from Southern California. And I was interested in like thematically how they are both so much products of where they're from, like not only the surroundings, but also their families. And I was thinking about like this herb that is native to California that like grows from the dirt and can be used in all of these different ways. And so I have both characters engaging with it at different times, and that herb means different things to each of them. For Emily, it's kind of a sweet memory of like her school garden growing Yerba Buena. And for Sarah, it's a more complicated, fraught memory that is like a moment of comfort during a very difficult time. And so I was interested in like these two California women and this native California herb and a restaurant named after it, and this idea of like cultivated beauty versus natural like nourishment, and how it all mixes together. And it's very funny because I've always lived in the Bay Area, but San Francisco is nowhere in this book. And so, I mean, I think it's mentioned like once or twice, but yeah, it's just kind of funny how that happens. I kind of went to the more northern and more southern regions of the state.
Yeah. I apologize if I am not I'm in my early 30s, like going through this, you know. I see not a lot of representation of, especially women, but people in their late 20s, early 30s still figuring it out. And like Route Way, which I know the background of your published works, and I think like this and Honey Girl are these beautiful stories of like still figuring it out when I think societally we're expected to have to figure it out, and I just wonder what, like, does that come from experience? Like, what was it that you put value in telling that story that I really don't see a lot?
Yeah, I love that question so much. I mean, I think for me, I was really interested in writing my first book for adults. I was very excited to like have these pivotal things that happen to both characters in their teen years, and then be able to follow them like beyond an initial sense of partial resolution or acceptance, and then to continue forward and see how that reverberates over, you know, the next decade or more. And I mean, I love stories about young women figuring themselves out. And I also like, I'm about to turn 40, so I've been like in this kind of, you know, reflective phase, thinking about like my life and who I am. And I think that it's so wonderful that we're always figuring ourselves out. I don't think that's ever going to end. And so it's been cool. Like, it was very fun to write, you know, I wrote a couple years ago now. So like, it was very cool to look back at my 20s and think about just my emotional, you know, state at that time, or just all the growing that we do. And I'm very interested in how like we need to really grow ourselves and work on ourselves in order to be able to love people well and to be able to accept love from others. And I just wanted to write a story about two people who are really wrestling with that, that goes beyond the 18 years. I'm glad that you noticed that, and then it meant something. Yes.
So it was noted that this is your first book for adults. What surprised you about the process of writing this book versus like your previous work?
Yeah, it was very like surprised me. I was surprised. I mean, the book goes into some pretty like difficult places, especially in the beginning. It gets pretty intense. And I guess I was surprised a little bit by like where I went with it. I was really just focused on following these characters and writing something that felt true to them. And so I just followed them there and realized like, okay, well, I mean, this is for a mature audience, so I can take them wherever I want to take them, and I don't need to hold back. So that was one aspect. The other, I guess, is like, I feel like actually this is the first time I, you know, read this passages aloud, and I feel like I'm constantly critiquing myself, even as I sit answering, you know, I'm critiquing myself. So I'm like, that passage went too long. I should have skipped over some of the restaurant stuff. Like I should have, you know, but I think, you know, in the reading experience, like the luxury of being able to go into like all of these pages of description about this restaurant and what it felt like and what it looked like is something that I allowed myself to do. For an adult reader, I didn't feel as compelled to like keep the plot moving as much as I tend to probably. Yeah, I think I would have just like cut myself off from doing like pages and pages of description. But I just allowed myself to do with it. Yeah.
So we have a couple of online questions.
Wonderful.
So this one says, can you talk a little bit about writing from two different characters' perspectives, and how do the two women see the world differently, and was it difficult or easy to make them meet?
Okay. Well, they're very different characters. Like they, Sarah, whose first section I read, is from Guerneville, a small Russian River town, a town that's a tourist town, but also, of course, people live there year round, and it's an incredibly naturally beautiful place. And it's also a place that has some poverty and some, you know, drug problems that have been prevalent for, you know, as long as I can remember, and I'm sure far before. And so she's from like her mother has died because of drug complications before the book starts. Her father is largely absent. She is the protector of her brother. She has a lot of responsibility. And she early on in the books, that's not too much of a spoiler, but she does make the decision to leave, and she leaves him behind, and that's kind of the burden that she carries through the rest of the book. Emily, on the other hand, is from a Southern California family that is quite comfortable. Her problems are not nearly of the same magnitude as Sarah's, but she sees herself in a very different way, and she sees herself as somebody who needs to be like the good, steady daughter of the family because of her sister's issues and struggles. And so they come together like at very different identities, like not only in their backgrounds and their cultural backgrounds and where they're from, but also in like what they see their roles in life to be. So I had to, I mean, it took me a long time to kind of like figure all of that out and then see how it would all play out on the page. But it was very exciting to like spend so much time with those characters and think about how different they are and how their different upbringings would influence the way that they would react to each other. And then in terms of switching point of view, I really struggled. I mean, structure was the biggest hurdle for me for this novel. I struggled for years. And so for years, I didn't even try to write it because I didn't know how I was going to tell the story. So I just, had to figure it out. And the way that I figured it out was just to tell myself I was ready to write the story and I was just going to start to write it. And I didn't have to have all the answers. I was just going to see what came and just trust the process. And so eventually I just did it. I forgot, was that one question or two? Was there another?
One question, but I do have another.
Okay, great. Yes.
This is, and I think it's a good segue. This is from Fernanda, who says your writing routine. You write routine so beautifully in all of your books, and I know you've mentioned you used to get a lot of self-doubt from writing quote small stories. How did you overcome these doubts, and why do you think routine is so important in your writing?
Routine. I think that I'm trying to this. I think I might have missed the beginning. Is this a craft question, like how I write?
Yeah,
like my writing.
I was mistaken. It's not about your writing routine. It's the content of routine in your writing.
Okay. Yes. Well, I'm fascinated by routines. I'm not somebody who has been able to like pull off having routines very much in my life, and I crave like structure and order. But I don't know. I don't feel like I'm very good at it, but I'm always striving for it. So a lot in my work, I show the things that I'm striving for, and that like my idealized version of what life would be like, and if I could have structure. So I think that I am very interested in the things that we do that kind of anchor us or ground us in ourselves, and the objects that we engage with, and the things that we see, like if you're going to take a walk out of your house, like the certain route that you most often take, and the mug that you most often like to drink from. Like I think that all of these things add up and they give like meaning and purpose to our lives and a sense, as I said, of groundedness. And so I'm always interested in exploring them in my characters.
Yes. You've referenced a few times how this story has kind of been in you for a very, very long time, like 20 years. Because so much of the book, as we talked about, kind of reflected how badly you wanted to go to a restaurant or different areas that you've lived in the Bay or different experiences you've had. Can you talk a little bit about how your idea for the story evolved over like 2 decades of life?
Yes. Yeah. So my wife, Kristen, and I, then my girlfriend, I was like 20 years old. We went to New York, and I hadn't ever been in New York, and we like got off the subway in Brooklyn, and we wandered into a cafe. And something about the space was very inspiring to me, and the character of Sarah appeared to me. And I just like saw her, and I, in my mind, and saw that she had a brother, and saw that she had like run away, and that she was very guarded. And I was just very captivated by this idea of this character. And so I started writing right away, and probably in the cafe that afternoon. And then I just kind of kept thinking about her. And then the character of Emily came to me shortly thereafter, and I wrote a bunch of scenes, and I used those scenes to get into grad school, and I got my MFA, but I set the novel aside while I was in grad school. And then I started writing young adult novels in graduate school, and my thesis became my first novel still, and I just continued to write YA, and I love writing YA, and I will still continue to write YA, just to clarify. But in between, like turning these books in, I would have a little bit of time before starting a new one, and I would always pull out these pages and look at them and wonder if I could make them into a real book, like if I was ready, if I knew what the story was. And most of the time, I would read through it and I would think like, this is interesting, but this is like by a totally different writer, because like years would pass and I would change as a writer. And here I was like reading these scenes, and I write in a very fragmented way, so I wouldn't even remember like what it was supposed to connect to, or it was just very difficult. But also, like over time, my idea of what the story would be changed a lot. Like at one point, like there is a mansion in this story where a couple of people live, but at one point, like all of the characters were living in the mansion, and it was like this big story about like all these like people and clashing and coming together, and it's like making a life in this like falling down building that was being restored. Like I had that idea. I also didn't know what the tone would be. Like that one had a lighter like feeling than this book ended up having. And then I thought like I would go super literary, and I just like didn't know. I didn't know how to write it. And then I think like during those like early sheltering in place months, like it just felt like very important to me. Like I think just something about like being stuck inside the uncertainty of the moment. I was like, I want to write this book. Like I don't want to never finish this book. That would feel like a big loss to me to not finish it. So then I started over from the beginning, and I didn't know what it was turned into at all. And so a lot of it really surprised me. I at one point, like in the beginning, it was going to take place in New York, and then the whole thing was going to take place in LA, and then it was going to take place in Oakland for a while. Like I just had no idea. And so I think it is a reflection of like where I was when I was writing it. It's no longer the book that like 20-year-olds me conceived of at all. But those characters stayed with me, which has been fascinating. And it's also been like, it's been a very emotional process for me to let go of this book, because like it has just been like the novel I've been writing like my entire adult life. And nothing feels perfect when it's finished to me. And so I'm like, okay, well, oh my gosh, like, I did the best I could go out into the world. So, but luckily I have another idea for the book now.
When did you know it was a love story? Because Sarah came first and then Emily after.
Yeah, I knew like as soon as Emily came, I knew that it was a love story. That's what connected them, because they're not connected in other ways. Like they have not grown up together. They have very different lives. Emily, like for a brief time, works in that restaurant, but she's not like in the restaurant industry or anything. And so I knew that like the love story would be what balanced them together, the two storylines together. But that was part of the fun and the challenge of the writing, I guess, is to see like how they would actually come together, and then like when they do first come together, like why that wouldn't be the right time, what else would need to happen. And I had this big question, like, is it a love? For a while I was wondering, is it like a romantic love story? Is it a sibling story? Is it just a like parallel story that should talk to it, like how much of it is going to be like connected by the love story? I ended up deciding like, yes, it's a romantic love story. Like it's everything else as well, but like it is a romantic love story. So then in revision, I went back in and made it more like committed. I committed. No idea how we're doing on time. Maybe like one more question. Okay. A couple last questions.
I'll ask one.
Okay.
One follow-up question to Mandy's. Okay. I'm just curious, when you went back, and you said when you went back to the original scenes you've written and saw that they're written by very different, were like what differences did you perceive, and did you take any hints from your old self, like re-inspired by your old style at all?
I think Luca would like, my dog would like to answer. Let's see. I don't know that I was inspired. I think I saw some interesting dynamics at play in those old pages. Like there were things that were very fascinating to me, but they weren't things that I wanted to continue to explore. Like there were whole characters that were completely cut, that were kind of big characters. My agent Sarah is here, and she came all the way from New York, Boston. And like she read the earliest pages. Like I would send them to her, and she'd be like, yeah, like okay, yeah, keep going. I mean, I think that I would get like it's very like internal, like how about like the rest of the world? And it ended up being a book that like is very like focused on like like there is a lot of description, there is a lot of the rest of the world. I think I was holding very, very tightly to these characters and had a very like narrow lens, like, and part of the writing was a process of like widening their worlds a lot. And I think it was also like looking at the pages of like a very young writer trying to figure out how to tell a story I wasn't ready to tell yet, because I was like in my early 20s trying to write a story about people who like had more life experience than I did, who had like grown a lot more than I had. And there was something about it that felt like more grasping than like now I feel like I'm able to write, like I'm writing about younger characters than myself and I feel comfortable doing that. So yeah, but I mean, it was fascinating. Sometimes I'd be like, this sentence doesn't sound like me at all. Like not in a good or a bad way, just like in a way that I had no idea who that person was. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. This has been so fun. I had a book release during the pandemic where we had no in-person event, so it's very fun to be able to celebrate this in person with you all. And thank you so much, and thank you to those of you on their computers too. And thank you so much, Green Apple, for hosting.